So we're in the end of John's Gospel in a series where we're talking about He is risen, resurrection appearances of Jesus in John's Gospel. And we've got two to go, one that I'm preaching on this week and one where Ben is going to be sharing with us next week. But I want to start with the last few words of John chapter 20. If you have a Bible, it might be good to open it up. If not, then I'm going to read them to you here. And if you can cast your mind back to a few months ago when we first started looking at John's Gospel and we talked about Zoe life, that idea of the full life that Jesus wants to give us. We used these verses then, almost at the end of John's Gospel, almost like the purpose of John's Gospel. And John writes these words: Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. And John has really summarized up the whole of his book about the importance of believing, not just an intellectual state of mind, but actually active faith. And that brings us that life, that eternal life, that full life, that Zoe life that Jesus wants to give us. And that John's book is writing and showing the signs and wonders of Jesus, the living God, that point to who he is and the life that we can have. And that would be a good finale, a good fitting end to John's gospel, wouldn't it? But John seems to add an appendix, an epilogue, a couple of other stories that he throws in as a bonus at the end of the gospel. And we're looking at one of those now. And it's the Jesus and the miraculous catch of fish. And the very first thing I want to say is that it shows, this story first of all shows the humanity of the disciples. Have we got any human beings in the room this morning? Oh, one or two. Okay, interesting. So let's read this story bit by bit from John chapter 21. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Interesting. So this starts out with this word afterward, and John quite often does that. John will say afterward or later, and by that he's showing us that a period of time has passed. He's not going to tell us all the things that gone on in that period, but there's another interesting story that he wants to tell us. And the disciples, or at least 7 of them, are back in Galilee. Remember, the earlier resurrection appearances were down in Jerusalem, down towards the south of Israel. The disciples have gone back to where most of them lived in Galilee, up in the north. So they've gone from the big cosmopolitan city. They're countrymen, they're fishermen. They've gone back to where they live. And it's interesting that John gives us some resurrection appearances of Jesus in Jerusalem and in Galilee. That Matthew emphasizes the Galilee appearances. Luke only has Jesus appearing in Jerusalem. Is that a contradiction? Is that a complication? No, it's just the emphasis that the different writers are showing. And they're back here, called the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Galilee. Galilee was the Jewish name. Tiberias was the name for the same lake that the Romans gave it. And there are 5 named disciples. Simon Peter, Thomas, called Didymus. If you weren't here last week, you need to get online and listen to a really great sermon from Peter Brind last week about Thomas. Nathanael from Cana in Galilee. That's the town where Jesus did his first miracle, turned water into wine. It's not too far from the Sea of Galilee, not too far from Nazareth. The sons of Zebedee, that's James and John. So what does that tell us immediately? It tells us that John, who's writing this, was there. This is eyewitness stuff. This is not hearsay. He was there. He was involved in this story. 2 other disciples, unnamed disciples. Interesting. Were they part of the 12 and John's memory went? Were they other fishermen who might have been wider group of the disciples that followed Jesus? We don't know, but we know that there were 2 others there. And they've escaped from Jerusalem. For whatever reason, they don't feel comfortable in the city. Perhaps they felt trapped. Perhaps they felt persecuted. Perhaps they just didn't know what to do. Pressure was getting too much. So they go back to where they know, and they go back to what they know. And it says here, Jesus appeared. And that word is, again, it's one of those words that means more than just appeared. It means, if I'm appearing, I'm making myself known, I'm disclosing myself, I'm showing who I really am. So that's this idea of appearance. And it's obvious that Peter is the leader of the disciples. He's a man of action. He doesn't know quite what to do. It's as if they're all sitting there and they're all waiting for Peter to do something or say something. That, there's some anxious foot tapping, there's some twiddling of thumbs, there's some biting of nails. The tension is getting too much on what's going to... And Peter suddenly breaks that and says, I'm going out to fish. And it's like a collective sigh of relief. They say, great, we'll go with you. We know how to fish. That's what we used to do. We can do this. So off they go. They're fishing together. They went out into the boat. But that night, they caught nothing. Things haven't worked out the way that Peter had planned, and we're going to hear about his restoration next week. But they take this opportunity to jump into a boat to go back to their old life. And they don't catch anything. They don't catch anything. I guess as fishermen they would have known occasions where the catch wasn't bountiful. I wonder if they've ever caught nothing before. Remember, this was where they were used to fishing. It's often thought that Peter, if you go to Capernaum now, you can see where they think Peter had a little fleet of boats and was a fisherman. So they go out and all night they catch nothing. It's as if they don't any longer fit back in their lifestyle. And one of the things I want to talk about a little bit later, but I'll just give you a taster of it now, is that sometimes when life is challenging, sometimes when life is confusing, sometimes when we think that Jesus has abandoned us, the temptation there is to step back into our old life, into our old way of thinking, our old patterns of doing, the places where we used to go. And this is what the disciples are doing, and they find that it's completely unfruitful. Or to put it another way, it's completely unfishful. They haven't got anything. But if this reveals something about the humanity of the disciples, and you've heard me say this enough now, every time we come to the disciples, we should both be encouraged, challenged, and warned about some of the ways that we can follow Jesus and some of the pitfalls that we might find. And if this reveals something of the humanity of Jesus, because we've all been in that place where we felt we haven't heard from God, he might have abandoned us, we're a little bit confused, we don't know what's going on, what are we comfortable with? Let's go back to the way things used to be and try that. And we find that's not quite as attractive as it used to be. But if this reveals something about the humanity of the disciples, it also reveals a lot about the divinity of Jesus. That Jesus is the Lord. This is what these resurrection appearances are about. So let's read a little bit further. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" Long pause, they look in the boat. "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, who's that? John himself. Well done, you're remembering. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It's the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off, jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. This is interesting. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples didn't realize that it was Jesus. Are they so preoccupied with their failure that they don't see who it is? Is it the coldness and the tiredness that's weighing them down? Actually, early morning on the Sea of Galilee, I've been there. It's normally quite misty. So it may well be that they're still a little way out. They see a figure on the shore, but they don't quite recognize who it is. And Jesus calls out, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" It's very colloquial, the language that he's using there. It's almost like somebody in Britain saying, "All right, mate, you caught anything?" Looking at an empty bucket, knowing that the guy hasn't caught anything. It's quite provocative, quite jokey in the language that he's using here. And the disciples could say, "What's it got to do with you? We're the professionals, mind your business." But they don't. There's something about the voice of Jesus, even though they don't quite realize it's him, they're willing to reply, "No," they answered. "Yes, we are the professional fishermen. We have been out all night. We are the people who've caught many a fish in this lake. But today, no, we haven't got a sausage in batter, let alone cod and chips. We haven't got anything." So Jesus responds, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." It's a test of their obedience. It's a test of their faith. It's a test of their willingness. Can he see a large shoal of fish from the shore that they can't see? Don't know. But what's incredible is, even though they yet don't quite know who this is, they're obedient. When they did this, and look, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. So you can't contrast enough the state of their catch in their own strength and the state of their catch when they begin to trust the voice of Jesus. And I hope that's a little bit of your story, that you can recognize what your life was like when you tried it on your own, even when you went back to trying it on your own, and what life is like when you hear the voice of Jesus. They were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, John. John's on the case. John's spotted. John realizes either the boat's got a bit further, you can see who Jesus is, or, when you hear that, I recognize that voice. Who's that? Oh, it's the Lord. Or whether he's seen the miracle and he realizes only the Son of God could do that. But John is on the case. It's the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say this, "It's the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken off, and jumped into the water. What the heck's going on there? Well, they would have stripped off some of their outer clothes to fish, to do that heavy work of hauling the net in. And you would think that he would stay in that state of semi-undress if he's going to jump in the water. But he's been very Jewish, he's been very formal. He can't imagine meeting his Lord and Master, his rabbi, without being properly dressed. So he puts his outer cloak back on, jumps in the water. All these things must be going on in Peter's mind. We've known Peter be obedient to Jesus and jump in the water before, haven't we? And we give him a little bit of criticism because he sank in the waves, but quite often we don't give him a recognition for his faith of actually stepping out of the boat in the first place. And here he is again, diving in the water while he's so desperate to get to Jesus. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. I tell you, I've been in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, and I've been 100 yards from the shore, and I wouldn't want to jump in even 100 yards from the shore. It's a lovely, lovely, beautiful, beautiful sea, beautiful lake, but it's still quite a way and some choppy water to get in. So Peter's exercising faith here again as he jumps in. Is it the authority in the voice of Jesus that has brought this change in their obedience? What's interesting is God's at work, the miracle is happening, and they still don't quite realize that it's Jesus. And for some of you today, the take home that I want you to walk away with today is sometimes in your difficulty and your struggles and your disappointments, Jesus is there, and you might not even have realized it. You might not be seeing him quite yet. You might not be hearing him quite yet. You might not be touching him quite yet. But he is there. And sooner or later you will see that face, hear that voice, see him at work in your life. And quite often our testimony is this, isn't it? That we don't realise God was at work, that Jesus was there, until we look back and we see what he was about and what he was doing. But here, the miracle happened to their obedience to his voice, but they weren't even sure that it was Jesus. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing their net full of fish. And let's read on. And I want to say this, that when we put the humanity of the disciples together with the divinity of God, of Jesus, we get this beautiful fellowship and partnership. And that's what we're talking about in church here. When we put our humanity, our availability, our broken, frail, messed up, confused lives, when we put that together with Jesus, there's an incredible partnership and fellowship that happens. And this is what the disciples are discovering again. Let's read on. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you've just caught." Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. So they're about to eat fish and bread. Have they been in a place before with Jesus where they've ate fish and bread? Is this going to be a little bit of a memory jog for them? Remember the last time we were together and fish and bread were involved and Jesus did something miraculous? There was a bit more than 7 of us there. There was thousands of us there being fed. So Jesus said, "Bring some of the fish you've caught." Simon Peter climbed back on the boat. He's this man of energy. He's already jumped off the boat. He swum to the shore. Now he jumps back in the boat. And he's trying to manhandle for himself a net that wasn't broken, full of, not just full of fish, look what the detail says, full of large fish. I don't know where a small fish becomes a medium fish, becomes a large fish, unless it's in the chip shop. I guess I know that. But 153 large fish, that's a pretty big catch, isn't it? And Peter's trying to pull all that up. Their nets were strong, but not that strong. Quite often in the early life of the disciples, we saw them mending their nets on the side of the shore. And here they're pulling in, and it's so strong that 153, the net doesn't break. 153, why not 150? 153, that's a lovely little detail that John throws in. Some people say, oh, it's significant for this, the known languages at the time, the known nations, all this. I think it just points to the fact that somebody, John or whoever, counted the fish. And we've got this other little incident, as they're eating. I like to imagine that somebody in the back of the... you never guess how many fish were in that net. I counted them. 153. You're joking? Yeah, have we ever done better than that before? I don't think so. We'd better ask Peter afterwards, but I think this is the biggest catch we've ever had. Half an hour ago, it's going to be the most embarrassing catch they've ever had. Now, it's potentially the biggest. Also reminds me that God is interested in the detail, interested in the numbers. If you ever see me on a Sunday morning standing here and sort of looking dreamily around, it's because I'm counting how many people are in here. And we keep a record. Peter, every month, sends back to Elim headquarters on our behalf how many people we've got, how many people we have in midweek meetings and things like that. Numbers are important. Not just for the sake of numbers, but it gives us some encouragement if numbers are good. I can look around and see who's here, who's not here. And God is a God of the details. Incredibly, God is the God of creation and of the big and of the mega. But he's also the God of the small and of the detail. And in this story, John is pointing to us that 153 fish, large fish, were caught. And Jesus says to them, come and have breakfast. When you're a Christian, food and friendship is a ministry in itself. Actually eating with people, having fellowship with people, it's a ministry in itself. That's why we don't just say, come down for 2 hours and have a chat on a Thursday afternoon. We say, come down, have a coffee, have a tea, have some cake. That's why at Alpha, we do the same. We don't just say turn up. We like to sit down and chat and eat and break cake together. I'd like to encourage those of you who like cooking and friendship and chatting that it's a vital part of Christian living, being able to eat together. And here Jesus reminds them, come and have breakfast. That's why occasionally we do women's breakfasts and men's breakfasts. Perhaps you should try to find us a seaside restaurant that will do us bread and fish for breakfast next time. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. And Jesus comes and he breaks bread and he breaks fish and he gives it to them, sending them back to that incredible miracle when out of their hands, he fed 5,000 people. Just reminding them who he is and what he's already done with them and through them. This is now the third time that Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Jesus had about 7 resurrection appearances, but 3 of them specifically to the group of disciples. And so the ones that were here and experiencing this was their third reaffirmation of who Jesus is. And the resurrection appearance is always linked to the character of Jesus and always linked to equipping the disciples for the future. Fantastic little story. Let's summarise it a little bit and think some more things, what might we take away from this? Well, it's another incident to emphasise the reality of the resurrection. Jesus was bodily resurrected. Jesus did come back from the dead. It's a reminder that when we're obedient to God, the end result somewhere always down the line is a move of God, an answer to prayer, a miracle, whenever we're obedient to God. It's a reminder that Jesus might be right on your case, near to you, in your situation right now, and you might not realise it. It's an opportunity to say, even if you've messed up and you've thrown your nets on the wrong side of the boat, and it's been a complete waste of time and a disaster, Jesus is always offering you a second chance and saying, hey, that might have failed, but how about trying it my way, my side of the boat? If you feel like you've been here before, if you feel like you've stepped back into your old life and that's not working for you, the invite is always for another opportunity to join with Jesus and to walk on his path. Jesus wants to meet you today in the ordinariness of your everyday life. In the struggles, the challenges. Sometimes we over-spiritualize Christian living and we think we have to divorce it from what's going on in our everyday life. It's actually completely the opposite. And so whatever's happening in your life right now, perhaps it is that season of unfruitfulness, of not being uncertain, being a bit confused, tempted to step back. That's exactly where Jesus wants to meet you and call out. That following Jesus' direction always leads to your best life. Now, your best life might not be what you imagine it sometimes, but being obedient to Jesus and following his voice will always take you to the place that he wants you to be. And I've always said, the best place you can be is where Jesus wants you to be. The best place you can fish in your life is where Jesus wants you to fish. The best place where you can have fellowship and friendship and grow is with Jesus and with the people of Jesus. And so for some of you, the word from God this morning might simply be this: try fishing the other side. That side's not working. Try fishing the other side. For some of you, it might be simply discovering the joy of spending some time together socially over food with other believers. It's about time you dusted that old recipe off and invited some folk around. It's about time you popped into the big welcome. It's about time you went to young adults. About time you spent some time socialising with people, eating and drinking together. I think most of all, it's a reminder that the resurrected Jesus was still about the miraculous. And Jesus is showing he's the same Jesus that fed the 5,000. It's the same Jesus that's now appeared to them and giving them bread and fish. And I hope you know that the same resurrected Jesus that did that miracle of the 153 fish is the Jesus that we trust is walking with us today. That the Jesus who let his Spirit live in us so that we can experience the miraculous in our lives as well. The disciples again were given this glorious little taster of the abundant, overflowing, eternal life that Jesus had promised to bring. Even the disciples who'd been with him for 3 years, even the disciples who'd already had 2 resurrection experiences with him, still needed that prompt, still needed that reminder of who he is and what his purposes were about.